Hey everyone, my name is Ethan and I'm a developer and author of the build kits over at CodeStitch, and today we're going to be using the new advanced website starter kit to turn this website for a client called Casablanca Bakery into something which supports two different languages and has a menu controlled by the CMS, which we can see down here. So like I said, this does use the new advanced website kit which we've recently released at the start of this year. And you can find it in the link in the description below. It comes with a couple of different branches which each contain their own feature, such as two different CSS preprocessors, a CMS which we'll be getting to use today, an optimization branch which we'll also be using a little bit today, and also the option to create an e-commerce store using Shopify. There's going to be a lot to cover in this video, so I'm going to waste no time and jump straight in. So we've made it nice and easy for you to get started with this repository, as it has been sent up as a template repo. And all this means is that we use this template button up here, where we can create a new repository directly from this one. Make sure that you click include all branches here. Otherwise we're going to lose the feature branches that are included with the advanced kit. You can give the repo a name and choose whether we want it to be public or private, and then press create. So if you've ever used the intermediate starter kits before, it's more or less the same process to get started. But because we are using a template repo with different branches, merging these branches in is going to require a few extra steps than what you may think, as creating a new repo from a template will lose all the commit history, which is how merges are possible. So every branch is going to be one commit deep, so we're going to need to use the command line to merge these branches in. But first off, we can open this up in VS Code using our preferred method. To make it easy for this demonstration, I am going to use the GitHub desktop app, which I have installed here. Could just clone that again. And if we press open in Visual Studio Code, we should see the starter kit here, with all of the different branches existing here as well. So for this project, we're going to be using the less optimization and CMS branches, and the way we merge an individual branch in is we simply open up our terminal and use git merge, and we use the allow unrelated histories flag, and this will essentially allow us to merge these branches in despite there being no history for Git to resolve any conflicts. It does mean we'll have to resolve conflicts manually, but we can work through this together. I think the first branch we're going to merge in would be the less branch. So if we do that, and then we go over to the source control tab here on the left, we can see that there are some conflicts that have arisen. Starting off with the package JSON, resolving any conflicts here is typically as simple as just pressing accept both changes, because we want all of the npm scripts from both the main and the less branch to be merged in. So we also want all of the dependencies that exist on both branches too. So that one's a fairly simple one to resolve. The package lock is a little more difficult though, because when we start merging in a few branches, we can see there's loads of different places where conflicts can occur. So I quite frankly like to just ignore these and just merge them with conflicts being unhandled. And that's the first branch merged, so we can commit those changes and not sync them just yet. Now we should only really be seeing these conflicts exist in the package lock and Eleventy config files. So as long as we know how to resolve each of these files and the sort of conflicts that arise, it shouldn't be too difficult to get the starter kit set up. The next branch I'm going to merge in will be the optimization branch. And here we can see our first Eleventy.js conflict, where we can also again just accept both changes, because we're going to have some content coming in from the main branch, some from the optimization branch, We just want to make sure that everything gets merged in to the project. So here we can see that one side, the main branch, has this code here, but the optimization branch is trying to merge in this code here. So we can tell just by looking at it that there are a few things here that don't exist on the main branch, which is up here, but these pass-through copies exist from the optimization branch, and we actually have a to-do to get rid of some of these. So we could just accept the incoming branch here, incoming merge from the optimization branch, and that's that been resolved. Package JSON, again there's a couple of scripts, so we could just accept both, and a couple of dependencies where we can also accept both here, and any duplicates get highlighted. So because both sides of the branch, both sides of the merge, use some dependencies, if we accept both changes, they're both going to come into the project. So we could just remove the duplicates, and everything should be working. Press save, resolve, and complete. Commit. So we've done the less, we've done the optimization. The last thing we need is the CMS. Once again, we're going to get some conflicts in Eleventy.js. So we've got a couple of imports from dependencies we need, but there's also a filter, which we're probably going to want to include. So we could just accept both the imports and the filter here. Down here we've got the plugins from the optimization branch that have been merged into main, and now because the CMS is trying to bring some white space in, we of course don't want the white space, we just want these plugins here, so we can accept them. Now this might be a little more confusing as we've got the pass-through copies and extensions set up from the main branch, which originally came from the optimization branch before. But we've also got a filter here that we're going to want to copy over into the rest of the project. And these pass-throughs already exist up here, so we could just move the filter up and accept the current change. Resolve, complete, package lock, which is going to resolve with unhandled conflicts, and the package.js we're going to accept both and get rid of any duplicates. Just like that. So this can be a little bit confusing, so I do advise maybe doing a few test runs before going into a project using this kit. Essentially, to recap it all though, when getting set up with the kit, you can use the templates button at the top of the repository to create a new repo from template. You can then merge in the branches you want, and we should only be seeing conflicts in package.json, package lock, and Eleventy.js. For the package and the Eleventy files, we want to make sure that all code goes into the project, so any conflicts that arise, make sure that one unique line from each branch is going into the project. The package lock we can ignore until the end here when we're able to commit and sync all of our changes, and then we can run npm install, where all of the dependencies in package.json will be installed and a new package lock will be written, and hopefully by then everything should be working. So I'm going to let these install and we will come back when that has been done. Okay, so now our dependencies have been installed, so we can check that everything is working okay just by running npm start. And this will start up a development server using the code in the advanced kit. Now of course we do already have a static version of the Casablanca website made, so our first step will be to copy some of the code over. But just to see that everything is working, we can see that running the development server loads everything up. For each branch that we've merged, we can see there's a little landing page that just explains some of the features that exist on that branch. We can also see a starting of the menu that we're going to use which is controllable by the CMS. So that's a good thing to see. There's been no errors and everything's booted up completely fine. The next thing to do before we can completely call the project ready to go is that there might be a few to-dos in the project. And to make it easier to follow, and so you're not just following loads of instructions in the README, you can do a search across the project for CS to do. And you can see that there's all of the things that we need to do here, just with a short instruction on what we need to do. Now, to keep the file structure open in Git, of course, GitHub automatically removes any empty directories. So we will see that there are a few directories here where a placeholder markdown file does exist. And while we're here, we can delete them all, which I think the best way to do that is to open all the folders up. And then just do a Control F for placeholder markdown. And then we can just go through and delete them all. Because there is a CS to do in each of these. So we can just get these all in one go. Then we can go back to our search and we could just follow some of the instructions that we find here. So because the CSS and JavaScript is being handled by these extensions here, they're getting passed through Eleventy as templates, which means we can use post-CSS and ES-build on each of these languages here. We don't want to pass them through using a pass-through copy in Eleventy. So we can do that. The README has a few instances of CS to do that we don't really need to action, so we can just dismiss that. Same for the index page, just dismiss that. This one's telling us to update the client JSON file. This is something I'll do off camera when we have some contact details from the client, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete that now to cross it off the list. Same for the OG tags here. Of course, when we start uploading some content, we may want to go back to put a logo here, so I will keep this one just so I don't forget. But this is something that definitely should be done. And this CS to do is more of a heads up on how we can use preloading for responsive images. If we have a couple of different images that are being shown at different device sizes, we can use a responsive preload by following this link here for some more information on how that's done. But that's something that I can do off camera when we get the page speed for this up nice and high. Now with the ES-build bundling, this allows sort of next-gen syntax to be used, so that we are able to import individual JavaScript files into an app.js file and then serve that singular app.js file, so we're not making multiple HTTPS requests on the page load. So I am going to go into the base HTML, remove the scripts and replace that with app.js. And if we look into the files that are getting served, we can see that there's dark.js and nav.js both existing within app.js. Of course, if we did still want to use them individually, then they are here as well. But if we're not importing them, they won't get served, so that's fine. That one could be removed then. There's some extra information on how we can further configure the JavaScript bundler if we didn't want those additional files to be built, and if we did want to bundle to a single JS file. There's some instruction on how to do that here, but I'm completely fine with how things are at the minute. There's some instructions on how to use the image plugin. Now this is something that I'm not going to cover in this particular tutorial, but when we do release a full tutorial on the advanced kit, we will go into this in a bit more depth, as this is a very powerful tool for optimizing your assets and save a lot of time in doing so. But for this, I am going to remove the image plugin here, as well as the config and the plugin import up here. And while we're at it, we can also remove the plugin config file itself. And that should be a few to-dos resolved. Again, some more instances of CS to do, which we can just dismiss here. Styles, we're not going to worry about the starter styles because we've already got the page that's been statically built, so we can just remove that as well. And while we're at it, we might as well delete the starter styles itself. And if we wanted to extend the kit with some post CSS modules, we can include them here. But again, this is something that we can either cover off camera or just not at all. So we can just get rid of that. And that just leaves my single reminder to change the OG tags before we deploy this. So I think we are good to commence the project properly. So with that, we should be ready to start moving over the code, the assets, and everything else from the static version of the site into this new version of the site that we're building with the advanced kit. So I'm just going to pull that over to one side here. So on the left, we've got the static version of the website, and on the right, we've got the new project we're working on with the advanced starter kit. I think I'm just going to go top to bottom, and we can start migrating everything over into this project. So here there is a client JSON file that we're probably going to want the contents for in the advanced kit, as this has all of our contact details, the domain we're going to be deploying to, and everything else that might be useful for the client. Of course, we have still got the menu JSON here. We're just going to use this as placeholder text for when we come to link the website up to the CMS. The includes, this is going to have pretty much the same stuff, but just to be on the safe side, I am going to remove it from the advanced kit and paste over the includes from the static version of the kit, just so we can make sure the header and everything is identical to how it is on the static version of the site. The admin, we're actually going to keep the same because this has the menu config that we're going to be using to power the menu, make that controllable by the client. Of course, the intermediate kit only has the blog, so that's not really particularly useful to us. The assets, we're going to want everything from the static version of the Casablanca website, so we can just copy and paste that over here, but we're also going to want this assets Eleventy data.js file as well, as this excludes all of these files from being within the Eleventy collections. And that basically means that when we pass the JavaScript and CSS as templates as part of the optimization kit, these don't appear in any Eleventy collections where we might be rendering the blog or the sitemap, etc. So we can copy this file over here, delete the file entirely from the advanced kit, and then we've got everything we need here, so just copy over back into the advanced kit with all of our assets. And we are going to be seeing some errors here while we work through things. We can come back and resolve them at the end. So same for the content, we're going to want everything to be copied over. So the content JSON, which gives us a sitemap tag, so we can use the sitemap HTML file to generate a sitemap from collections.sitemap. We're going to want this to be in the advanced kit as well, in the new version of the project, so we can remove it from the advanced kit and send it back over like that. And now we have all of the pages from Casablanca, as we can see here. And I think all that's left is just a simple copy and paste of the index.html. And then I think that's everything more or less copied over. But we may have some things to resolve here. So I am just going to restart the server to make sure that there's no issues there, and it does seem like we're getting some errors, and it looks like the post date filter's not being found. So we're going to want to come and grab that from the Eleventy.js. There's the post date filter, and we could just move that over into the file here. And I think this is actually the same as format date? It does. So a better way to do this will be to just use the filter we've already got set up. Find where we're using the post date filter that's causing us errors, and instead just use format date. And if we save everything and then try restarting the server again, does that fix the errors? It does indeed. And if we open this back up into here, we can see there's some funny looking things coming through. But I think that's just from the menu page that we've deleted the CSS for, but is still existing in public, because Eleventy by default doesn't remove files after you've removed them from source. If you delete them from source, they'll still exist in public. So I think just to make sure that everything is working properly, we'll close everything down. We could even close down the old version of Casablanca that we were migrating to the new version of the kit. And if we do a full rebuild, we can make sure that everything is looking how it should. And if we look at the project now, we can see it's looking more or less how it was in the static version, which is very good. We can see that some of the JavaScript's working to cover the header when we scroll. And the dark mode toggles working as well. We can see all of our content here, all the images, all the styles and all the pages, the CTA, everything's working exactly how it was, which is very good. So we can now make a start on internationalizing the project and getting this set up in both English and Spanish versions. And we can see, if we look on the Eleventy documentation, there's two pieces of documentation which I'll link in the description, but they're definitely worth a read if you're following along. Essentially, within Eleventy, there's a plugin that we can use that can help manage pages and link in between localized content. And it simply comes as a plugin that already comes with Eleventy that we can set up and configure. It gives us a few useful tools here to help manage perhaps linking between two different versions of the website. So instead of having to specify links separately, we can use this filter here, which will look at the current locale that we're on, and if we're on the English locale, it will then render blog as en blog. If we're on the Spanish version of the site, it will render as es blog, and some more details down here. But there's also some guidelines on how we can set up an internationalized project, covering how the file should be organized and how the URL should be styled. So we're going to be following this convention of organizing our files, where we have a folder with English and Spanish content, but instead of HTML files, we're going to be having markdown files. Now the reason for this is, if we head over to our website here, of course, we could break up the website into two different things. We could break it up into the HTML and the CSS, and then separately we can group it as the content. So we've got the HTML and CSS, and we've got the text content. Now, if we're working with an internationalized website, the content's going to be changing, but we probably want the styles to stay the same, and the HTML and everything around the code of the website should stay the same. We just want the text to be changing. So if we were to set this up as an English directory of markdown files and then a Spanish version of markdown files, we can then take the HTML for the website, we can remove all the text content, we can set that up as a template which we can then feed in the text content, and when Eleventy builds the website, we can get an English and Spanish version of the website made with the same HTML template but different text content, and then that way we have a single source of truth. We can change the HTML template but have the text content stay different, and then the English and the Spanish versions of the website will have those changes from a single place. So it may be a little bit confusing to understand why, but when we get into building this, it should be a bit easier. And then in terms of URL style, just to make things simpler, we are going to build into an English path and a Spanish path with the path name afterwards. So if we go back into VS Code here, the first thing we're going to want to do is install the Internationalization plugin, so we can start using some of the tools that Eleventy provides to us to make this go a little bit easier and make there be less things to change when juggling two different versions of content for the site. So the Eleventy Internationalization plugin is something that already comes with the base version of Eleventy, so we can just use this object destructuring syntax here to pull out the plugin from the Eleventy npm module. And the next thing we're going to want to do is just add a plugin in a very similar way to how we have done elsewhere. And we are also going to need a Eleventy Internationalization config file, which we can create now, which we're just going to do under the plugins i18n folder right here. Just create that file, and the only thing we need to do for now is to just specify a default language for Eleventy to use. We're just going to do it like that. Now this has thrown some errors in the console, and it does just seem like there's some duplication. Sometimes this happens with Eleventy. It says that Eleventy is writing to two different files when really there's just been a bit of a hiccup in the system. So restarting the server has fixed that. We've got the very basics set up now. Now one of the things that this does supply is a page language value. And of course, whenever we're using semantic HTML, we should be using a language attribute on the HTML tag. And it's going to depend on what version of the website we're on, what value should be shown here. So if we're on the English version of the website, this will resolve down to EN. If we're on the Spanish version of the website, this will go down to ES. So we can just press save there. And the next thing I think we should do is we should start creating some templates for us to use with markdown files. So to sort of physically demonstrate what I mean here, we're going to want to use this HTML for both the English and the Spanish version of the website. And we just want this content here to change. So we can start off by creating a layout, which I'm just going to call home HTML. And I'm just going to copy and paste this into here. Now we can then start thinking about where do we want the text content to come from. I think for that I'm going to create a separate folder called i18n under content i18n. We're then going to want an English and a Spanish folder, just like that. And if I go for a home markdown file into each of them, it's going to be here that we can keep the data to render these pages. So of course, with markdown files, we can specify some front matter, and just for the sake of demonstration here, I am going to do front matter in each of them, and we're going to specify maybe the title text here. So in English, of course, we're going to want to use this here. And the way I like to organize this is just by the name here. So we're going to have a home object, and within this home, hero. And for the hero title, under the English version, we're going to want this text. Whereas on the Spanish version, we're going to want some other text. Of course, I have got all the translations saved, but I'm probably going to do that through a time lapse or something, just so I don't waste too much time on the tutorial. Now, both of these versions here are going to want to use the same layout. They're going to want to use this home HTML file that's found in includes layouts. So if we create a layout define the layout within the markdown file. Layouts, home, HTML. We're going to want that, oops, here as well. Then if we just for now specify a static permalink, maybe we want to use en home here. And we'll just specify that we're writing to the index.html file. We can do the same here, but for es. And we should see, hopefully, if we go over to localhost 8080 here, and we go to en home, we can see that there's a file here with the text that we defined in the markdown file. If we go to the ES version, it's still not working. And the reason for that is because I forgot to specify within the template itself, of course, that we want to be using the hero.title text. And there we go, we can see it's now working on the Spanish version of the website here. So to sort of recap what's happening here, we've taken the HTML file out of Pages and we've set it up as a layout. We've then changed the title to use some hero.title data, and this data is coming from the English and Spanish versions of the i18n file. In the English version we've got the English text that we want, and in the Spanish version we've got some other text that we're going to replace shortly. And of course, because of how the Eleventy data cascade works, the front matter data is going to take top priority. So when we're rendering this file, hero, the first place we're going to look to before computer data, will be the front matter data. And then of course we can find a hero title value. So when we're on ES home, we're going to see some other text. And when we're on EN home, we're going to see the actual text here. Now what we will need to do is we'll need to go through and we need to replace all of this text with this kind of syntax here. So I'm going to get a broad skeleton going just to sort of show how it would work. I'm then going to do the rest of this page and fill in the blanks here. So we are back, and just to sort of get ahead with things, and because the client requested some edits to quite a few pages, I have just done all of the translations for all of the pages now. And we can see that here underneath content i18n we have got the English translations and the Spanish translations respectively. We have also removed the pages directory that was in content, and we've moved all of the pages into layouts, which we can see for the about page over here. And of course all of this is using the nunjux syntax for the respective markdown files. So the catering title will be here in Spanish and here in English. And we have also removed all of the text from the front matter, and we brought this into the markdown file as well. And this is just so we can have the title and the descriptions internationalized as well. We still need to get the descriptions from the client, so I'll probably change that off camera. But this will work exactly as it did with the front matter being here. It's just at a different place in the data cascade. And we can kind of see this in action here. If I'm on the Spanish path, I can see a home page which looks pretty Spanish to me. Aside from the menu, of course, we will change that separately. And if we go over to the EN path, you can see it goes back to English, which is really quite cool. So the next thing, which is pretty obvious, is that the navigation needs translating as well, as does the footer. Now these we have to handle a little bit differently because we're not rendering pages from these, and instead we're using these components here. We can't render a full page like we did before and use markdown files. Instead, we're going to have to use some global data, and we're going to have the English and the Spanish translations included there. Now, that also raises another issue in that we're currently controlling the internationalized content based on path. So if you're on the EN path, then you see English content, whereas if you're on the ES path, you see Spanish content. But because we're not writing to new files, we can't use the URL, so to speak, to control the language that we're seeing. So with this plugin, if I just go over to here, and if we make some changes to header.html here, and next to about we use this page.lang value that I mentioned at the start that comes with the Eleventy Internationalization plugin, we can see that ES is rendered when we're on the Spanish site and EN is rendered on the English site. So we can use this in some global data. If we create a header.json file and we have one with English, we have one with Spanish, we can use the page lang value when we're accessing the value that we want to view, and it will render the appropriate translation. So if we were to say here for the home, actually no, let's do about, we say EN, and if we go to about here and we say ES, we can then, instead of using about here, we can remove this, and because we're using global data, we can just access it using the two curly braces with header. Then we want to look into the page.lang using the square brace notation here. Then we want to look into about. So if we're currently on the English path, we'll go header, EN, and then about. And if we're on Spanish, we'll be accessing this one here. And if I save this, we can see that because we're on the English path, we see EN there. From the Spanish path, we can see ES. So I'm just going to very quickly run through and upload the translations so you can see what this looks like in full for you in the Internationalization plugin. And this takes the form of the locale URL filter. So if we just go like this and wrap the slash here in apostrophes and use the locale URL filter. If we then go down to the footer, we can then click this page and it takes us to the proper page that we should be on. And I think a better example would be go to another page. We can then go down to the footer to the home page and it will work for the Spanish version of the site. And if we do the same but on the English version of the site and click the link, we get taken to the English version here. So this essentially will take the locale that you are currently on, and then for each website that it renders, the English version, it will actually resolve to that, and for the Spanish version it will resolve to that. And we basically now just need to go through and for all of our anchor tags supply this filter. So this will be another jump to the end, and I'll see you when the internationalization has been fully set up. So wherever there's an a href, you should be able to see we're using the locale URL filter now. And that essentially means that we can just click about and have all of the links take us to the correct language, just like that. And that's everything set up. So the very last thing we need is we just need a way to switch between the languages, so we can easily jump from the English to the Spanish and vice versa. So I think we're just going to have an icon maybe at the top next to the dark mode toggle here. Could probably use more or less the same styles, and whenever we're on the English site it will show a Mexican flag because it's a Mexican themed bakery. And whenever we're on the Mexican site, we can then flip over to the English. So I'm going to go ahead in header.html. I think right next to here, I'm just going to have an anchor tag with a href of en, and then another one of es. And we could just set up a little nunjucks if else statement to say that if page.lang is equal to en. We want to go to the Spanish site here. Else show the English. If we just indent these, we can then drop an image in. Assets, SVGs. I believe it's EN and ES SVG. No, so ES we want Mexico.svg, and EN we want USA. Just give it some alt text. Just like that. Give it a class. Actually, we'll do an ID for this because there's only going to be one of these. We can go language toggle. Maybe a height and width attribute too, just to keep it semantic. So 48 by 48 if we're going to be following the dark toggle. Because it's above the fold, we'll use eager loading too. If we then go to the rootless, we find the dark toggle. I believe we should just be able to add these styles to the language toggle, except maybe we want the right to be more like 40, just so they're not overlapping. And it looks like we're getting a 404 on this. So why is that happening? Assets, SVGs. There we go. If we try adjusting that right slightly, I think we might also want to bring the sizing down a little bit as well. So we could just give that a play here. Let's try 16 for now. And I think I went the wrong way with the right. Cool. So I think we went too small now. So we'll try 32. Nice. And for the top, let's just do it in pixels for now. Actually, yeah, 32 seems pretty spot on. Nice. And if we click that, we go to the EN site, and we click that, we go to the ES site, which is good. And then all we need to do is to just repeat the exact same thing again, but instead change the right. Let's just try 0 for now and see what happens. Maybe a little more, maybe negative 16. Let's try that. Perfect. And it's all being registered by my browser. So even if we're on the Spanish site, we can translate within the page, but we don't really have a need to do that because we can go get the true translations just by clicking this toggle here. And of course, it's all being registered with the correct HTML attributes. Everything is working well. So if you just wanted to watch for the internationalization, this is how you do it. This is the project set up in its internationalized form. Now going to be moving over to working on the menu, to hooking this up within the CMS, and making this internationalized as well, so the user can have the Spanish and the English menu on the same page, side by side. Provides a good little workflow for the client, and it will all be rendered on the correct language accordingly. Okay, so to get started with the menu, I've got ahead a little bit and I've used one of the menu stitches and made a page in a very similar way using a menu layout with a menu English and Spanish markdown file. And if we take a look at the menu, we can see that it's working as it should. These are in fact changing. but because we're using very static data here that's just a repeat of everything, we can't really see that just yet, but hopefully we should be able to change that shortly. Now, I've pulled some data from a previous project that used this stitch, and the way that we were able to break this down, if I get these side by side here, is we've broken the menu down into courses, sections, and items. So here we've got the courses: breakfast, sandwiches, burgers, etc. Within each course we have multiple sections, which are these parts here. Each part with a different background is a section. Then within the section we also have items, as we can see here. So we're going to be using this data to dynamically render a toggle option, the sections and the items within that section. So it may be a little bit difficult to get our heads around to start with, but I'll try and take this nice and slow, so if you're following along you can do this yourself. So I think the best place to begin with will probably be the buttons here. So if I just press enter a bunch of times, we can sort of split this out. So for each course that we have, we want to render a button. So the best way to do that would be to copy the wrapper tag that we have here. Then we want to loop through the menu global data. So we can go for, if we call it course in menu.courses. Then within this for loop, so for each course we have, we want to render one of these buttons, but instead of lunch in this case we want to use course, and then here we can see we're using course name, so course underscore name. So we'll loop through this array, then for each one we'll access, so this becomes course on the first iteration, so we use course name breakfast, second iteration course name sandwiches, etc. Now when we first load the page, of course we're going to be on the first course, so what we probably want to do as well is set the active class that we can see here on the first button of the loop, and for that we can use a nunjux if statement, and we can say if the loop index, and that's how you'd access the index here, is equal to 1, render CS active, and then end the if statement there. Then the next thing we want to do is we want to dynamically change the filter value here. So of course we're using these data categories on the menu sections linked to the data filter on the button, and depending on what filter we click it will load that menu with the respective category. So instead of using the long form numbers where we use letters to spell out 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we're just going to replace this with the loop index as well. Be a unique identifier to each of the buttons that we build. If we just comment that out for now, press save and go back over, reload the page, we should be able to see we've got breakfast, sandwiches, burgers, salad sides, drinks and kids, just like we have here. Okay, so now that we've rendered the buttons, the next thing we want to do is to render the individual courses with their corresponding sections. So if we look here, we can see the example of a breakfast. So breakfast is the course that we'll be rendering here, and then within breakfast we can see that we've got a couple of different sections, which will be, for example, farm fresh eggs, hearty skillets, and then the items within that are all of these purple corn tostadas that we can see. So we're just going to take this example and use nunjux to render it out dynamically based on this content. So if we do another for loop, and we're still going to be going through the courses in menu.courses, But for each course that we render, we're going to want to render a menu group, just like this. And like we said earlier, we want the data filter value to match with the data category filter. So I'm just going to copy the loop index into that. We can also see that there's an ID value, which is CS menu 1. And of course, loop index will come out as the number 1. So we can just go like that. And just as a note, Nunjox doesn't use zero-based indexing. So for the first loop, this will in fact come out as 1. Not that it matters anyway, because as long as these two are the same and this ID is unique, we should be okay. So for each course that we have, we're rendering a menu group. Then within the menu group, we want to render the sections. So breakfast, and breakfast section 2, which was further down here. So for that, we will need to grab all of this code here. And when we're within this for loop, of course, the course that we're seeing here will be exposed as this course variable here. So we can actually do a for loop on that course variable to look at the sections within that course. And this should actually be section, just like that. If we press save there, just to get the formatting working. So for every section that we're rendering, we're going to want to use the section name here, and also use the section description. So farm fresh eggs will appear in the H2 tag, and then the description will appear within here. Then within the menu list here, we probably want to use an example of one of the div tags here. So we can take this div tag and the rest we can throw out straight down to the UL. So we've got the list of items that we're rendering here. And for each item within the items array here, we want to render one of these. So if we then do a for loop and we go for item in, and because we're within the section loop here, we could do section.items. Render it accordingly. And then we can use the item name, the item price, and the item description. So that might have been a lot to take in, but just to recap once again, we're looping through the courses. For each section within the course sections, we're rendering a section out, as defined by the section tags here. Then within the menu list, we are listing out the items here. And of course, we're also using the section name, section description, and all the item tags where appropriate as well. And at a very basic level, this should be pretty much good to go. We should start seeing the data coming through on this side. It doesn't look very pretty at the minute, and we are going to go through and do some things to tidy this up, but it's working. There is still all of the content that we haven't deleted down here, so I will very quickly go ahead and remove that all the way down to the bottom. If I just delete that, and we can just fill in the tags that we've missed, which should just be one div tag. The VS Code's telling me that's okay, so I will trust it. Refresh, and yeah, the kids section just has the for our kiddos. So that's good, but we have got some improvements we can make. So of course, not everything here has a price or a description, for example, and that's causing some sort of fragments to be left that we might not want. And these are very simple fixes to implement. So before we render the item name, all we want to do is just check if item name exists. And if it doesn't exist, simply that element won't be rendered. Of course, I should hope that all of the items do at least have a name, so this will probably be more applicable for the price here. If we see, we refresh, those empty circles where the price would have went have disappeared. Lastly, we could just do the same for the description. Now, anywhere without a description won't have that p tag that was missing. And that's just kind of improved the resiliency of this a little more. We can make these optional fields and the template will handle the outcomes accordingly. But we've also got about 6 items, sometimes more, lined up on a single row. And if we were to go right down into mobile, of course it goes into column format at some point, but maybe on tablet we can see that's pretty terrible to read. We've got words broken across multiple lines, about 2 words per line, and I think we can do a lot better than that. So what we can do is we can see here we've got rows that are being generated in this div tag, which should, this should be a div technically. And when we render these rows, we might want to batch them into groups of 3. So instead of doing for item in section.items, we can instead use the batch filter, which looks like this. So for row in section.items, batch 3. And this pretty much does exactly as it says on the tin. It will look onto section.items, it will batch them into groups of 3, and then it will render whatever's in here 3 times, and then it will go on to the next set of 3 and render the items, the 3 items in there, so on and so forth. So if we take this for end for tag, move it to the end, and instead of going through section.items, we want to iterate over the row. Hopefully things should be looking a little bit better. There we go. So just to illustrate that on the live website, the menu list is this part here. We're taking the items in section.items, we're grouping them into lots of 3, and then we're rendering those 3 items out into a row with the CS3 tag applied. And that looks a lot better. If we go out onto the full screen version, we can see that maybe it might be worth supplying some more information just to balance this out, maybe adjusting the styles to account for the cases where it is just 2. That sort of stuff I can sort of deal with in my own time. But otherwise we've got a dynamic menu here, and because we've used the advanced starter kit, if we just duplicate this tab and go to the admin path, we can see this is all linking up to the CMS. So I kind of jumped ahead there, but because we've used the advanced starter kit and we've pulled over the menu JSON file along with the config YAML file with the menu config setup, this has essentially created this data on the side over here, which is mapped out into the CMS like this, and everything we've just seen before is editable in a sort of user-friendly way. And if we look at where it says 2 eggs on breakfast, we can just put hello world, and it looks like I'm missing a couple of fields. So it looks like section description is actually a required field that might not be what we want. So I'm just going to go to section description, put a required false there. Hopefully if I reload, that should be everything. We might catch out some more sections that need to be taken as, put down as not required. Oops. But yeah, there we go. And I'm not too sure where I actually, yeah, there we go. Hello world has just appeared there. So completely dynamic. Of course, when we come to deploy this project and we link up the CMS to Netlify, then we will have authentication. We can add our client to the admin path. They can make an account. They can come in here and they can edit this of their own accord completely in their own time. So the last thing we need to do is to set up the CMS to allow for both English and Spanish translations within the CMS, meaning the client can make changes without a developer's support, but also to make those changes in 2 different languages in a user-friendly way. And we're going to be using some pretty cutting-edge technology from Decap on this, as it does support internationalization within beta. And all we need to do for this is to just go to the top level. You need to specify internationalization. You need to specify a structure. In this case, we're going to be using single file, but it is worth noting that you can separate your languages into different folders, to different files within the same folder, or all under the same file, but separated in key value pairs, 1 for each language, which is what we're going to be using going forward because the menu is contained in a single file currently. So we'll specify the structure as a single file. We'll specify the locales that we're using on this project, and we'll also define a default as well. Locale English. So once we've specified this at the top level, we can also specify this both on a collection and field level. Because we've done all of the configuration up here, all we need to do is just put i18n true. And this will essentially, for this collection, use the same settings. And then we can go through and specify what fields we want to be in the 2 different languages. And for this case, we want all of them. So maybe if instead you are having a unique ID field that you wanted to be the same between English and Spanish, you wouldn't have i18n true on that particular field. But for this case, we want everything to be translatable in 2 different languages. So we're going to specify i18n both on the collection and on all of the fields within that collection, as well as the mandatory top level configuration 2. And if we go over to the admin path, we can see how this is looking. And there we go. So because we're restructuring how the data is going to work so it can support 2 languages, it has removed all of the data that we originally had before, but it has given us a side-by-side window of both the English and the Spanish translations, giving us the option to add courses, sections, and individual items both in 2 different languages. So how would a client use this? Well, like I say, it's in 2 different languages, so we're going to have to start with one. And for the sake of this example, I'm just going to write a bunch of test data within the English version. Section, description is optional, I'm just going to supply the names. Also specify a price as well. And then once we've filled in the data on one side, we can then go over to the fill in from another locale at the top. And if we click EN, it will take everything from the English side and copy and paste it over to the Spanish side. Now this does come with a warning because, of course, anything we have already written on the Spanish side will be replaced with what's on the English side. So this won't be empty anymore, this will say description. But that should be fine. And if we now take a look at the Spanish side of things, we can see that the description has been copied over. Now, in recording this video, I have found a little bug within the internationalization feature of Decap CMS. Like I said, it is in beta, so there are going to be some things that don't work quite right. And it seems as if when using a single file structure, the internationalization on the string widgets only work one way. I can't seem to change it on the Spanish side. That's me pressing backspace there. It only duplicates, which is a bit of a shame, but we can easily fix this just by going to the config file, looking for the string widgets and changing them to markdown widgets as well. And now we can change things on both sides, and just to make it obvious, we'll call this English course and this a Spanish course. Oops. Publish that, and if we now look at the menu JSON file, we can see that the menu object has been split into an English half and a Spanish half, each with identical data structures, I should say, but different content. Of course, this one's English, this one's Spanish. This does mean there's going to be two very small adjustments within the menu HTML file that we're going to have to make that I've already got ahead and done, and that's simply adding page lang before anywhere the menu is referenced. Of course, everything within the language is going to be the same, so we just need to make sure that when we're generating the buttons, we're accessing the correct page language. When we're generating the courses, we're accessing the page language there too. Everything following on from that should be the same. And I am just going to do a quick reboot of the server just to make sure we are pulling through the latest data. If I do that and go back, we can see the English course is there on the English site. And if I switch to the Spanish site, that changes to the Spanish course. Now I'm going to very quickly off camera just go through and upload the English and the Spanish data, and then we can see what the project looks like in full. So I am back, and after entering all of the data for both the English and the Spanish menu, we can see how everything is looking. And yeah, if you look on the left, you can see everything is written in English, and if we look on the right, we can see everything is written in Spanish. And if the client ever wants to come in and make any changes, they could just do it side by side and modify these independently. I think everything is looking pretty good though, and if we just go to the English version of the website, we go over to the menu and we select hot food. We can see all of the hot food options here in English, and if we go over to the ES path and go back to the same place on the menu, we can see it's all in Spanish, and that is completely customizable for the client. So the last thing we need to do is we need to make it so when a user makes a request for the website, they're taken to their preferred language. Now this is something we're not going to be able to test locally because it is done through the Netlify TOML configuration file, but essentially what we're going to set up is whenever the user lands on the root path, so just slash, we can look at their preferred language in the header of the HTML request, and we can redirect them to the appropriate path based on that. So this is done in the Netlify TOML file, and we can set up the redirect rule just like this. And we can say we want the user to go from the root path to the Spanish path when the language is equal to ES. And this is the syntax we have to use here. The language needs to be specified as an array. We want to say what path we want them to go from, where we want them to go to. Now we will also provide a 302 status code, and we will force the user to do this, so we won't give them a choice really, otherwise they could end up going to the slash path and end up getting 404s, and we will also need to duplicate this for the English path too. And I believe this is everything done. So like I said, because this is done in the Netlify TOML file, we won't see this when we're testing locally, and the only reason we're seeing something here is because I haven't cleared out the public directory. If I was to clear this, then we will be getting 404 pages here because we've got nothing being built directly to the root of the file. But if we take a look at the project in its final, we can see we've got English, Spanish versions of the site, all with the same HTML. All of the page links work to their appropriate pages, and it's very easy to jump between the two. We've also got a menu that is done in both English and Spanish versions, and this has all been set up with Decap CMS using the Internationalization beta feature, which provides a good little workflow for the clients that they can easily adjust themselves. So that takes us to the end of the video. If you have been following or building along, thank you very much for sticking with me, as I appreciate it has been quite a long one. But we have covered quite a lot of ground, and this is definitely a good way to approach building these sorts of projects. It's all statically generated, gives a bit of flexibility to the client, and it's just a better way of building websites, full stop. So if you have got any questions, please feel free to leave it either in the YouTube comments, our Reddit or Discord. Everything will be linked below in the description. And yeah, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next tutorial.